What's up guys, LiftingNerd here. In this video I'm going to give you an explanation of how the character creation system works in Wasteland 2, and by the end of the video I will also give you an example of how I would build one of my characters in the party. But first let's talk about attributes. In Wasteland 2 there are 7 different attributes you can choose from. By default you'll start with 3 points in each attribute, and this can be changed by either removing or spending an attribute point. If you remove it, it will be added to your pool of available attribute points, and you can now spend it on a different and perhaps more appealing attribute for the character build you want to make. The minimum amount of attribute points is 1 and the maximum is 10. Notice as we hover over these with the cursor, the text below in the derived stats section will either turn orange or gray. Orange means that the specific attribute will influence this stat. For instance, if I put the mouse cursor above the luck attribute, you'll see that critical strike chance and chance to evade is being highlighted. That means that luck will influence these two stats. By putting points into these attributes, their numbers will increase and improve. As an example, take a look at critical chance and chance to evade in the derived stats section again. If I choose to pump all my 7 points I have right now into luck, these numbers increases as you can see, and this goes for the other stats or attributes as well. And alright, let's talk about each attribute and how they work. The first attribute on the list is coordination. This attribute will make your character a lot more graceful and improve his or her motor skills. It does that by giving you increased action points and a higher chance to hit with your ranged attacks. Additionally, it becomes easier to pick locks and avoid traps. If you don't know what action points are, then let me briefly explain it to you. Wasteland 2 is a turn-based game. Each turn a character has a certain amount of action points available to him or her. Things such as attacking, moving and so on will cost action points. For that reason it is obviously always a bonus to have as many action points as possible. Coordination is, however, not the only attribute that will give you more action points. Attributes such as strength, speed and intelligence does also award these to an extent. And coordination is one of the most important attributes for anyone wanting to shoot a ranged weapon in this game. The next attribute on the list is the popular luck. Luck will increase your chance of getting critical hits, your chance to evade, your chance for additional constitution per level, and lastly, your chance of getting bonus action points per turn. Additionally, luck also impacts what kind of hidden caches you discover in the Wasteland and how much loot they contain. And also your likelihood of escaping if you try to run away from a random encounter. But you'd never do that, would you? There are also certain resources and events on the world map that you will only be able to discover if you are extremely lucky. Luck is a funny attribute, and if you want to build a character that relies on dealing lots of critical strikes, then luck is an important stat and you should probably go for that. The third attribute on the list is awareness. This attribute will make your character able to notice the details in the world around them, thus making them harder to ambush, and since they will often be the ones who notices their enemies first, they will also be the ones who has the opportunity of attacking first, and this is called combat initiative. If you're building a character that relies on getting that first hit in combat, then you need to have a good amount of awareness. The next attribute is a classic. It is strength. Strength will make your character's melee attacks hit harder. It will also increase the amount of gear or items your character can carry, and with this attribute you'll also recover faster from injuries. And lastly, with sufficient points put into strength, you will also be able to use heavy weapons, as they are called. The way strength makes your character more tanky or able to sustain more damage is by increasing your constitution. Constitution basically controls how many hit points your character has and how many you can gain by each level. And as you can see, strength is also one of the attributes that will give you increased action points. If you want to build any character that relies on brawling or melee weapon attacks, then strength is one of the most important attributes. Now let's talk about the attribute speed. Speed will increase your reaction time, reflexes and how far a character can move per action point. With good reflexes you also gain additional initiative in combat and more action points. It's fairly straightforward. Speed is fairly useful for any melee character, and the reason for this is that a melee character will spend a lot of action points running to their enemies. With speed, these characters will be able to travel further per cost of action points. And we're nearing the bottom now, guys, and the next attribute on the list is intelligence. The main thing there is to know about this attribute is that it will give you more skill points per level. And that means that a character with high intelligence will have more skill points he can use every time he levels up compared to a character with low intelligence. With the starting 3 default points put into intelligence, a character will gain 2 skill points per level. With 10 skill points in this attribute, you would get 5 skill points per level. Pretty significant. You should note that intelligence does not influence the amount of starting skill points for your character. Additionally, having a high intelligence will allow you to read certain books in the game that can grant you permanent bonuses to your character. Trust me, finding a book that grants you a permanent bonus and not being able to read it sucks. Intelligence is important if you want to make a character that relies on having lots of different skills. A character with access to all these skills often turns out to be one of the most important characters in the party, even if he lacks the combat prowess that some of the other characters may have. And now for the last attribute on the list, charisma. And this is one of the attributes that a lot of people often ignore or neglect, as it doesn't directly influence your character's destructive powers. But to be completely honest, this is actually my absolute favorite attribute in most of these typical RPGs. Charisma improves your character's personality and desirability, and a high charisma will improve your persuasive and leadership skills. Okay, so we're now done with the attributes, guys. It is now time to take a look at the skill points. And as you can see, you're starting out with 12 skill points that you can choose to spend in whatever you want to. And if you hover the mouse over these skills, the game will give you a pretty good explanation, but let's quickly go through these together as well. One thing to notice that is specific for skill point distribution is that as you spend more skill points in a certain skill, the cost of these will increase. To begin with, it will cost you 2 skill points to get a single point to progress. In the end, you'll have to spend 8 skill points to level up these skills. So the first skill we're going to talk about is Animal Whisperer. With points invested into this skill, you basically gain the ability to interact with animals in the Wasteland. The more points you put into this skill, the higher chance of success when interacting with animals. If you want a few cows or goats following you around, this is the skill for you. This skill actually opens up for a few interesting situations in the game, so if you have a lot of skill points you don't know where to spend, then you might want to consider spending a few here just for the fun of it. The next skill is Barter. And this doesn't require much explanation. It basically reduces the cost of items and increases the amount of scrap or money you get from selling items to any vendor you encounter in the Wasteland. By spending points into this skill, the value of items you sell will increase and the value of items you purchase will decrease. The third skill is Brute Force. This skill basically works by allowing you to use your strength attribute to smash and open up stuff. One thing you need to be aware of is that if you're trying to open a locked container by using brute force, then you might end up destroying its contents. So be careful with that. The fourth, fifth and ninth skill I'm going to explain as one. And these are the hard ass, kiss ass and smart ass skills, also known as the triple ass skills. These skills, if high enough level, will basically unlock new dialogue options when talking to NPCs in the Wasteland. Hard ass makes you able to intimidate, kiss ass makes you able to charm or sweet talk, and smart ass allows you to manipulate the people of the Wasteland. The more points spent, the more dialogue options you'll be able to choose from. I'm personally going to spend a lot of points in these. I love the extra dialogue options, and they usually open up for some really interesting situations in the game. The next skill is Leadership. With points in Leadership, there's less risk of your allies ignoring commands. Leadership will also buff your companion's chances to hit, and this skill is not to be underestimated. It actually makes a notable difference compared to not having it. The next skill is Outdoorsman. This skill basically allows you to avoid random encounters or getting ambushed as you travel through the Wasteland. Additionally, the Outdoorsman skill adjusts the overall water consumption rate as well as the length of time your squad can last without water before suffering from dehydration. I'm still not sure how useful I found this skill. I'll have to do some more testing before I make a judgment of that. Perception is the next skill, and by having a high amount of perception, your chances of noticing objects of interest, traps, alarms and secrets greatly increases. And this is a really cool skill, and I recommend that there should at least be one person in your group that has this skill. Okay, so we have already mentioned smartass, so we're now going to talk about the last of the general skills, weaponsmithing. This skill basically allows you to successfully salvage usable parts and modifications from weapons and install these onto your weapon of choice. Weaponsmithing will give you a wide range of modifications for you to go crazy with. And I know there's some of you guys out there that loves this. Alright, that was it for the general skills, guys. Now let's quickly go over the weapon skills. And please notice here that I'm not going to mention all the details here, but only what I consider the most important and things that might be worth considering. Additionally, note that by spending skill points in any of these weapons, the effect is that the chance to hit and base critical strike chance will increase, and this goes for all of the weapons. Now, let's start with the assault rifle. The good old assault rifle. And this weapon is the all-in-one tool as the game describes it. It basically has good damage, a fair amount of armor penetration and long range. The cons is that this weapon uses a lot of ammunition, which can be really annoying, trust me. Additionally, you need to be aware of that the chance to hit gets reduced when standing close to enemies. A character using an assault rifle greatly benefits from having a high coordination. If you like fighting up close, then bladed weapons might be a skill to consider spending points on. The thing that makes bladed weapons viable is their high critical hit chance and that you don't have to worry about running out of ammunition. The downside to these weapons is that when you don't crit, then you won't deal a lot of damage, and they have a fairly low armor penetration. Using bladed weapons on a luck and strength based character will leave your character with a very high chance to deal critical strikes, and the strength will help make up for the low damage of the bladed weapons when you don't deal a critical strike. The next weapon skill is blunt weapons. These weapons are great against armored enemies, and because of their 25% increased critical hit multiplier, when they deal a critical hit, they deal a lot of damage. The downside is that the critical hit chance is fairly low. The fourth weapon skill we can choose from is the Brawl Skill. The benefit of brawling is the very high critical strike chance and the low cost of action points per hit. The downside is the low damage this skill provides. And just as with bladed weapons, Brawl greatly benefits from the luck and strength attributes, as they will increase the damage of the attacks and increase the already high chance of getting a critical strike. And now to one of the skills that a lot of people are excited about, the energy weapons. And this category of weapons has the benefit of having a high amount of damage per action point and good armor penetration. The downsides are the high cost of action points to shoot and fire these weapons, and they can slow movement speed in combat. Additionally, enemies will have a bonus to melee critical strike chance against you. The next weapon skill is handguns. The benefit of using handguns is the high critical strike chance. As a matter of fact, handguns have the highest amount of critical hit chance of any of the firearms in the game. They also use cheap ammunition and has a low cost of action points to use. The downside to using handguns is that they have a fairly low range and they don't penetrate armor very well. Because of their already high base critical hit chance, any luck-based character will end up with a very high critical hit chance when using handguns. Coordination is also one of the skills that greatly benefits this weapon type. And now let's talk about heavy weapons. These weapons can deal a ton of damage per action point. They have good armor penetration, but the cost of action points to fire or use these weapons are very high, and just as the energy weapons, they can slow the movement speed in combat, and enemy melee attackers will have increased critical hit chance against you. One thing to notice here is that heavy weapons often require a fair amount of strength to be able to use, so you need to consider that if you're building a character around this weapon skill. The next weapon skill we're going to talk about is the shotgun. The shotgun, because of its bullet spray, allows you to hit more than one enemy at a time. With the right positioning, this weapon skill can be very efficient. It has a medium cost of action points to use, but the downside though is its short shooting range and the low armor penetration. And now finally, a weapon for you guys who likes to find yourself a good cozy spot to wait for your prey to come unsuspectingly forward. We are of course talking about the sniper rifle here. Sniper rifles deal a ton of damage, they have very long shooting range and great armor penetration. Sounds good, right? Well, the downside is that they require a high action point cost, they use some expensive ammunition, and they are not exactly great in melee range. The last weapon on the list is the Submachine Gun, or SMGs as they are called. These weapons are great at close range, and luckily they use cheap ammunition. The downside is that their armor penetration sucks, they have low critical hit chance, and they don't work too well if enemies are too far away. Alright, so that's it for the weapon skills, guys. And now let's talk about knowledge skills, guys. And as with the weapon skills, we're going to quickly go over these skills together. All of these skills, except for the field medic and surgeon skills, basically gets a higher chance to succeed with more points spent into them. Field medic and surgeon works a little differently, but we'll get to that. The first skill on the list is alarm disarming. As the name implies, this skill allows you to disarm and disable alarms and other means of security. This can be really handy at times, but also a lot of fun, as it sometimes allows you to complete missions or quests in an entirely different way than you would have thought. The next skill is computer science. If you want to feel like a hacker, then this is the skill for you. Computer science allows you to repair computers, rewire robots, and sometimes gives you access to hidden information. The third skill is demolitions. This skill mainly allows you to disarm explosives and deactivate booby traps. If you don't want to blow off a leg, then demolitions might be a good choice for one of your characters as you travel through the Wasteland. The next knowledge skill is field medic, and unless you plan on getting through the Wasteland unscathed, then this skill can be really useful. By spending points into this skill, you will unlock items that can be used to patch up your allies. The more points spent into this, the more items will be available for you to use, and the effectiveness of these items increases. And now for a dear favorite of mine, lockpicking. This skill is fairly straightforward. It allows you to lockpick and open doors, chests, and so on. And trust me guys, you can earn a lot of currency with this skill. And now that we're talking about earning money and opening up locks, I might as well mention safe cracking. It is not very different from lockpicking. Safe cracking, however, is used for the bigger vault doors and safes, of course. The skill is being called unethical. I call it handy. The next one requires only a few words. Mechanical repair basically allows you to repair various stuff throughout the Wasteland. Among these are gizmos and engines. Next on the list is surgeon. If your field medic can't fix you up, then you need to call in the surgeon. This skill allows you to fix the more serious conditions one might end up suffering from in the Wasteland. And this skill even enables you to revive downed party members and remove certain negative status effects on your characters. By spending points in this skill, you'll be allowed to use additional items, and the general effectiveness of your healing increases. And please note here that I would never recommend making a party without at least one character being proficient in this skill. Now the last skill on the list is the toaster repair. And this gimmicky skill will in certain situations present you with some really funny and bountiful experiences. But I'm not going to say more about this, there's no need to spoil the fun for you. Alright guys, the next thing you need to choose is the character's looks and customization. But first, let me show you an example of how I would spend my attribute and skill points for this character. Firstly, let me explain what kind of character I wish to make for it to make sense. I basically want an intelligent, persuasive character that receives lots of skill points for each level and is able to bypass various types of security such as lockpicks, alarms, computers, and so on. I don't need him to be very proficient in combat, I will leave that to my party members. This guy basically uses his wits and charismatic personality to survive in the Wasteland. To make this kind of character, I'm going to spend 10 points in intelligence. And as I mentioned earlier, that will leave us with 5 skill points to use every time our character levels up. I'm going to remove all the points in luck and speed. Coordination I will leave at the 3 default points. And lastly, I'm going to spend 7 skill points in charisma. One thing you need to remember is that charisma indirectly increases the amount of skill points this character will receive. The reason for this is that, as mentioned earlier, that charisma increases the amount of experience you gain. That means that you will reach higher levels than a character who has a low charisma. More levels equals more skill points for this character. So you could say that charisma and intelligence goes hand in hand or synergizes very well. With the very high amount of skill points gained, this character will in the end be very proficient in a wide array of skills and should be able to solve most of the situations in the game by himself, with the exception of some combat situations. And this leaves us with a character that will be very useful in most parties. But yeah, as I said, for combat we will have to rely on our party members. And since I want my character to be persuasive and able to breach most types of security, I'm going to spend 2 points in smartass, 1 point in alarm disarming, 1 point in computer science, and 2 points in lockpicking. As I progress through the game, I will of course spend more points in these, and I will among others also pick up perception, safe cracking, and most likely leadership. And that is how I would design my character, guys. When this is done, we can go to the next page and start customizing the looks, name, and age of our character. So let's do that. And as you can see, in this section we can choose a name, age, religion, if the character smokes, and if so, what kind of smokes does he smoke, and lastly, ethnicity. None of these choices besides gender will have any effect on your adventure through the Wasteland as far as I know. If you want, you can write your character's biography here. I'm too lazy to do that though. To the left you can choose your character's gender, outfit, size, skin tone, and so on. When you have done so, click the check mark, and we're now back to the previous character selection screen. Here you can choose to create 3 other characters to your liking, or you can choose 3 pre-made characters. As a general tip, I would advise you guys to either pick or create characters that will make for a balanced team. For instance, the character I just made is pretty weak and has a fairly low awareness. For that reason, getting a character that is strong in those attributes will be a good idea. In that way you will never be in a too bad situation. And remember that your party can hold 3 additional party members besides these 4, and these members of course have their benefits they can contribute with as well. Lastly, remember to bring a character that has the surgeon skill. Trust me, it sucks not having this skill when one of your party members is lying unconscious, hemorrhaging on the ground. And when you've chosen your next 3 characters, then it is time to start the game. And that's it for now, guys. I know this took a long time, but creating a character in these kinds of games is a fairly complex process, and there's lots of choices, and making the wrong ones kinda suck. One thing you need to remember though is that there's no best character. It all comes down to how you want to play the game and what you consider the most fun. Just try to keep in mind that attributes, skill points, and so on needs to synergize. If you keep that in mind, I'm sure your character will do very well. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it, or at least found it useful in some way. I wish you the best of luck in the Wasteland. You're going to need it. And if you're interested in telling me your party formation and the characters you chose for your adventure, please do so. I would be curious to hear. Thank you for watching, and bros, do you even nerd?